Two American cities are about to break temperature records that have stood for their entire recorded history. Salt Lake City could hit 107 degrees today. Billings, Montana, could reach 108. And here is the part almost no one is talking about. This is not the peak of the emergency. It is only the beginning. A single dome of high pressure is baking the west right now, and an even larger one is forecast to lock in behind it. Here's what is coming, and why it only gets worse from here. Right now, a single dome of high pressure is sitting on top of the western and north-central United States, and it is not moving. It is the reason several major American cities are today on the edge of their all-time temperature records. Not their daily records, their all-time records. The hottest readings ever measured at those stations in any month of any year. And the feature driving it is an upper-level ridge with 500 millibar heights, above 594 decameters. If that number means nothing to you, here is what it means in practice. It is one of the strongest, most stubborn high-pressure configurations the atmosphere can build, and it has effectively slammed a lid over the Intermountain West and the Northern Plains. The National Weather Service's Weather Prediction Center has flagged what it calls major to extreme heat risk conditions, and those conditions are expected to persist into late this coming week. Forecast confidence is high. This is not a maybe. This is happening today, and the peak is today. Here's why a ridge like this matters. A dome of high pressure forces air to sink. Sinking air compresses, and compressed air warms. It also suppresses cloud cover, which means nothing is left to block the sun. So you get clear skies, sinking warm air, and a surface that bakes hour after hour with no relief. Do that for one afternoon and you get a hot day. Do it for a week, straight over the same ground, with the same dome refusing to slide east, and you get what we are watching right now. The critical detail is not just how strong this ridge is, it is that it will barely move. The same ground gets heated over and over, with no overnight cool down and no day-to-day break to reset. That is the setup. Now let me show you exactly how hot it is about to get, and which cities are in the most danger. Two cities are the headline this weekend, and both of them are threatening their all-time record highs. The first is Salt Lake City, Utah. Salt Lake City's all-time record high, the hottest temperature ever recorded there across the entire history of that weather station, is 107 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, that record is in play. The second is Billings, Montana. Billings' all-time record is 108 degrees. That one is in play too. I want to be precise about what that means, because it is easy to hear record heat and tune it out. We hear it every summer. But there's a difference between a daily record and an all-time record, and it is a big difference. A daily record is the hottest it has ever been on one specific calendar date. The hottest July 12th on file, for example. Those fall constantly. Dozens of them go down every summer somewhere in the country. An all-time record is a completely different animal. It is the hottest that station has ever been, period. The single hottest reading in its entire observational history, no matter the month, no matter the year, going back decades. Those almost never fall. When a city threatens its all-time high, it means the current pattern is not just hot for the season, it is competing with the most extreme heat that location has ever produced. That is what makes this weekend genuinely rare and genuinely alarming. We are not talking about a warm stretch that nudges a few daily marks. We are talking about two major cities standing right at the ceiling of everything they have ever recorded. And they are getting there because of that one stuck dome overhead, not because of anything local or random. The same ridge is pressing down on both of them and on a lot of ground in between. Consider what it takes to threaten an all-time record. These station histories go back many decades, through every heat wave those cities have ever seen. Every brutal summer, every Dust Bowl-era scorcher, every modern hot spell is already baked into that record. For today's pattern to challenge the top of that list, it has to out-heat the worst day in living memory and then some. That is the bar. And two cities are sitting right at it on the same weekend, under the same ridge, which is not a coincidence. It is a measure of just how extreme this single blocking pattern has become. When one dome can push two separate cities, hundreds of miles apart, toward their respective all-time ceilings at once, the story is not really about either city. It is about the strength of the thing overhead. And Salt Lake City and Billings are only the marquee names. The heat is far more widespread than two cities, and the raw numbers across the northern plains are where this gets even more serious. Across central and eastern Montana and into North Dakota, today's forecast high temperatures run from 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and locally above 110. Those readings are running 15 to 25 degrees above normal for the middle of July. Think about that gap. Not 2 or 3 degrees warm, 15 to 25 degrees above where this region should be right now. The hottest raw temperatures are expected to bake into southwestern North Dakota. But the most dangerous conditions may actually set up a little to the north, across the northwestern part of the state, and here is why. That is where the humidity is worst. When you add moisture to extreme heat, the heat index, the feels-like temperature, the number that actually reflects the strain on your body, climbs even higher than the thermometer reading. Dry heat at 108 is dangerous. Humid heat at 108 is worse because your sweat can't evaporate efficiently, and evaporation is the main way your body cools itself. Take that away, and the heat goes to work on you a lot faster. So, the picture across the northern tier today is a wall of 100 to 110 degree air, locally hotter, sitting 15 to 25 degrees above normal, with the worst humidity stacked exactly where it does the most damage. This is not a beach day hot. This is the kind of heat that sends emergency rooms into overflow and puts power grids under maximum strain, as every air conditioner in the region runs flat out. But the afternoon high, as bad as it sounds, is not actually the number I would watch most closely. There's another number in this forecast that is quieter, less dramatic, and far more lethal. Let me show you what it is. The most dangerous single detail in this entire setup is not the afternoon high. It is the overnight low. And in the hardest hit areas tonight, the overnight low is barely dropping below 75 degrees. Here is why that matters more than almost anything else. Your body depends on the cooler hours of the night to shed the heat it accumulated during the day. Nighttime is the recovery window. It is when your core temperature comes back down, your heart rate settles, and your system resets before the next afternoon spike. When the low never drops far enough for that recovery to happen, when it stalls at 75, 76 degrees hour after hour, the heat stress compounds. Night over night, you never get back to baseline. You start the next day already behind, already overheated, and the margin gets thinner every single day the pattern holds. That is who this kills. Not the young and healthy caught outside for an afternoon. It is the elderly, the very young. People without air conditioning, people with heart conditions or kidney conditions, whose bodies are already working near their limit. For them, a string of nights that never cool down is not an inconvenience. It is a slow, compounding medical emergency. And the physiology behind it is not complicated. Your body sheds excess heat, mainly by pushing blood to the skin and by sweating. Both of those cost your cardiovascular system real effort. Your heart works harder, your blood pressure shifts, and you lose fluid and salt. In a normal heat wave, you get to pay that cost during the day and recover at night. In a heat dome with warm nights, you pay it around the clock, with no rest period for days on end. That is why heat is the deadliest form of extreme weather in the United States in a typical year, deadlier than hurricanes or tornadoes, and it does most of its killing quietly, indoors, in the days after the peak rather than during it. The death toll from an event like this is rarely visible while it is happening. It shows up later, in the counts of people who never made it through the string of nights. And we know exactly how this plays out because it has happened before. The 1995 Chicago heat wave killed hundreds of people, and the thing that turned it into a mass casualty event was not just the daytime heat. It was the warm nights that never let anyone recover. The same mechanism drove the 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome, which killed an estimated 600-plus people across the region. In both cases, the afternoon highs made the headlines, but it was the failure of the nights to cool that actually filled the morgues. That is the through line from tonight's forecast to those historical death tolls. The overnight low near 75 is the number the officials are watching, and it is why the warnings have escalated the way they have. The official response has ramped up fast, and the alerts tell the story. An extreme heat warning is in effect across large portions of Wyoming: central, north central, northwest, south central, southwest, and west central. It calls for dangerously hot conditions of 100 to 110 degrees below 6,000 feet of elevation and 90 to 100 degrees between 6,000 and 7,500 feet each day. The hottest temperatures are expected this afternoon, and the warning runs through 9 o'clock tomorrow night. An extreme heat watch is also up for central and western North Dakota, which went into effect yesterday afternoon as the dome built in. But the clearest signal of how fast this is escalating is the raw count of active weather alerts across the country. Yesterday, the number of active National Weather Service alerts jumped from 238 to 319. That is an increase of 81 alerts in a single day. Now, I want to be straight with you about that number because honesty matters here. Roughly 131 of those alerts are overseas marine and Pacific territory advisories, so the effective count over the continental United States is lower than 319. But the day-over-day surge is real, and it is being driven by exactly what you would expect: heat, fire weather, flooding, and severe thunderstorms all stacking on top of one another at the same time. When the alert map lights up by 81 notches in 24 hours, the atmosphere is doing something significant. And it is. There's a second cost buried in that alert surge, and it is the power grid. Every one of those 100-degree afternoons sends electricity demand toward its seasonal ceiling as air conditioners across the region run without a break. Under normal heat, the grid gets a nightly reprieve when temperatures fall and demand eases. Under a stuck dome with warm nights, that reprieve never fully arrives, so the system runs near peak load for days in a row, exactly when generating equipment is also running hot and least efficient. That is the setup for rolling outages, and an outage during extreme heat is not a nuisance. For the same vulnerable people the warm nights already threaten, losing air conditioning at the wrong moment can be the difference between a hard week and a fatal one. The question a lot of people are asking is a fair one. Why won't this ridge just move on the way summer heat usually does? Why is it stuck? The answer is in the jet stream, and it is worth understanding. The reason this dome is parked instead of passing comes down to the shape of the jet stream. Most of the time, the jet stream flows in a relatively fast, flat ribbon from west to east, and it drags weather systems along with it. Heat builds, then moves on. But sometimes the jet stream buckles. Instead of running flat, it loops into big north-south waves. Meteorologists call them Rossby waves, and when those waves get large enough, they slow down. They can stall, they can even briefly reverse. And a big ridge of high pressure caught inside one of those stalled waves becomes what's called a blocking pattern. It stops moving. It sits over the same region for a week or more, exactly like the one we have right now. There is an active and genuinely unresolved scientific debate about why these blocking patterns may be happening more often. One leading hypothesis, associated with researchers like Jennifer Francis and Stephen Vavris, is that a warming Arctic is part of the story. The idea is this: the Arctic is warming faster than the mid-latitudes, and that shrinks the temperature difference between the pole and the regions to its south. That temperature difference is part of what drives the jet stream speed. Weaken it, the argument goes, and the jet stream slows and gets wavier, which makes these stuck, blocking ridges more likely. I want to be careful here, because this is where a lot of coverage overreaches. That hypothesis is not settled science. It is actively debated in the research literature, and serious scientists disagree about how big the effect is. So I will give it to you straight. This is a plausible, well-argued idea about why stuck patterns like this one may be getting more common, but it is not a proven fact. And anyone who tells you it is certain is getting ahead of the data. What is not in dispute is the mechanism sitting over us right now. A large amplified ridge, caught in a slow wave, refusing to move. And that stuck ridge is not just making it hot. It is sitting on top of a landscape that was already primed to burn. And that is the second leg of this story. To understand why this heat is so dangerous, you have to look at the ground it is baking, because that ground was already in trouble before the dome arrived. As of this week's U.S. Drought Monitor, nearly 30% of the continental United States, 29.99% to be exact, is in severe drought, the category the monitor labels D2 or worse. More than 11% is in extreme drought, D3 or worse, and just under 1% has reached D4, the exceptional category, which is the single most severe classification on the entire scale. That is a lot of very dry country. Now, there is one honest caveat in that number, and I will give it to you. The severe drought figure actually ticked down slightly this past week by about 0.7 of a point because the eastern half of the country has been getting rain even as the west bakes. But that national average hides the real story. The east is wet, the west is drying out. And when you average the two together, the number can look like it is improving even as the fire country half of the map gets worse. The aggregate is masking a regional emergency. Here is why the drought and the heat are not two separate stories. They feed each other. When soil is dry, it can't cool itself by evaporating water, and evaporation is nature's air conditioner. So instead of the sun's energy going into evaporating moisture, all of it goes straight into heating the air. Dry ground makes the heat worse, and the heat, in turn, bakes even more moisture out of the soil and the vegetation, which makes the ground drier still. It is a feedback loop, each side amplifying the other. That is exactly why a single stuck ridge can escalate heat and drought at the same time, rather than just one of them. If you watched our recent coverage of the drought spreading across the country, this is that same drought. Except now it is the fuel bed sitting directly under a record-breaking heat dome. And a dried-out fuel bed under extreme heat leads to exactly one place. Right now, 10 large wildfires are burning across the interior west, and they are the visible product of everything I have just described. Heat plus drought made physical. The largest is the Babylon Fire in Utah. which has burned 103,633 acres and stands at 44% contained. Behind it is the Aspen Acres Fire in Colorado at 97,083 acres, 28% contained. And there's Gold Mountain, also in Colorado, which is only 7% contained. 7% with a record heat dome moving in on top of it. That number is the fireside version of the same escalation we are seeing everywhere else in the system. Containment moving the wrong direction at the worst possible moment. These fires are not burning in healthy green forest. They are burning in fuels that were dried out by the same drought and preheated by the same ridge that is threatening the city temperature records. And here is the dangerous part. The incoming heat is forecast to make fire behavior worse, drying the fuels even further and making containment harder, just as crews need it most. Firefighters talk about fuel moisture the way the rest of us talk about kindling. Wet wood resists ignition, dry wood goes up fast. Months of drought have pulled the moisture out of the grass, brush, and timber across the interior west, and every extra day under this ridge pulls out a little more. When relative humidity crashes into the single digits and the wind picks up, even large fuels that would normally smolder can carry active flame. That is why a fire that crews had partly boxed in can suddenly make a run. The weather changes the fuel faster than the containment lines can hold. A dome that adds heat and strips humidity is, in effect, pouring accelerant on 10 fires at once. The crews on those lines are not just fighting the flames in front of them, they are fighting the atmosphere overhead. The fire weather itself is critical today. An elevated fire weather risk stretches from central Oregon all the way down into Utah, with west-southwest winds of 20 to 40 miles per hour and relative humidity crashing to between 5 and 15%. That is desert dry air with strong wind on top of it, conditions under which a single spark can grow into a fast-moving wildfire within minutes. Red flag warnings are up in Wyoming's Bighorn Basin and around Casper, and there is a striking signal much farther north. 2 red flag warnings are in effect for interior Alaska, driven by lightning with humidity as low as 25 to 30% and outflow wind gusts to 50 miles per hour. When interior Alaska is under critical fire weather at the same time as Utah, that tells you how far this dried-out, overheated pattern reaches. The wildfires we covered burning across the west a few days ago are the third face of this exact system. Whenever a heat wave gets this severe, one claim reliably goes viral online, that the heat dome was engineered, that someone built it or is steering it using HARP or cloud seeding or some other form of geoengineering. I want to address that directly because it comes up every single time, and the answer is grounded in physics. The debunk is an energy budget argument, and it is decisive. The amount of energy stored and moved by a continental-scale ridge of high pressure is astronomically larger than anything human weather modification technology can produce. We are talking about a difference of many orders of magnitude. Cloud seeding is a real technology, but all it can do is nudge a little extra precipitation out of clouds that already exist and are already primed to rain. It cannot build a 594 decameter ridge. It cannot steer the jet stream. It cannot manufacture a heat dome out of clear air. There is simply no mechanism by which existing technology could create or park this feature. What we are watching is an extreme but entirely physically explainable event, made more likely and more intense by a warmer baseline, not by anyone's machine. And speaking of that baseline and of what comes next, this weekend is not the end of the story. It may only be the beginning. The most important thing to understand about this event is that it does not resolve on Monday. Behind this weekend's peak, the extended forecast guidance shows an even larger, amplified dome of high pressure locking in across the western and central United States through at least July the 22nd. That points to a high risk of extreme heat parked over the plains and the Mississippi Valley for well over a week, with temperatures running 15 to 30 degrees above normal, heat index values between 100 and 110, and overnight lows, once again, barely dropping below the 70s. That is the same dangerous combination we have been talking about. The compounding warm nights, the strained grid, the mounting risk to vulnerable people, except stretched out over many more days. There's no sign of a real cool down anywhere in the near-term forecast, and all of this is happening on a warmed baseline. The El Niño in the Pacific is strengthening notably right now. The Oceanic Niño Index sits at plus 0.98 for the April through June season, up from plus 0.51 the season before. That is a rapid intensification in a short window. A warmer Pacific tilts the odds toward continued heat and toward a more energetic atmosphere at both extremes, more intense heat and drought on one side, more intense rainfall on the other. In fact, we are seeing exactly that split right now. Even as the West bakes and burns, the same amplified pattern has been dumping 3 to 5 inches of rain and triggering flash floods across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. One stuck pattern, drowning one half of the country while it bakes the other. So when the forecasters say, "This is far from over," that is not dramatic language. It is the honest read of the data. This weekend is the leading edge of a longer, hotter, drier stretch. And that changes what you should be watching for in the days ahead. Here is what to watch. The peak is today, Sunday, so the next 24 to 48 hours are the most dangerous window for the record attempts and for heat-related emergencies. Watch whether Salt Lake City and Billings actually reach 107 and 108 degrees. If they do, these become some of the most extreme readings in those cities' recorded histories. Watch the overnight lows tonight and tomorrow night more than the afternoon highs, because that is where the human danger concentrates. And watch the fire lines in Utah and Colorado, especially Gold Mountain at 7% contained, because the incoming heat is forecast to push fire behavior in the wrong direction. For anyone in the affected zone, the practical steps are simple and they matter. Check on elderly neighbors and anyone without air conditioning, because they are the ones this pattern kills. Never leave children or pets in vehicles. Limit outdoor exertion during the afternoon peak. And take the warm nights seriously. So if your home is not cooling down after dark, find somewhere that is. One small note for the sky watchers, and it is genuinely just a note, not a driver of any of this weather. A minor geomagnetic storm, a G1, is forecast for tonight, from a glancing blow of an earlier eruption on the sun, with the planetary K index expected to reach 5. That has nothing to do with the heat, but it does mean the aurora may be visible across the northern tier tonight, the same night the heat peaks. Two different kinds of extreme, in the same sky on the same night, which brings us to the real question underneath all of it. Is this weekend's assault on the all-time record books a fluke of July 2026, an extreme but essentially random summer pattern that will pass and be forgotten? Or is it an early legible signature of a warmer, wavier, stickier atmosphere, one in which stuck domes like this become more frequent, more intense, and more likely to stack heat, drought, and fire on top of each other until the next one parks over exactly the wrong place and simply refuses to move? Today's records will tell us how extreme this one is. The pattern behind it will tell us whether it is the new normal. Watch both, and we will know a great deal more by the end of this week.